Hi, I'm Barbara Manco. This presentation is about opiate testing. It's for my DNP class in epidemiology at Wilmington University. I wanted to start with current information, but it's provisional because it takes a few years for the information to be compiled. So it looks like for 2016 the rates for opiate deaths will be more than 64,000. It's an epidemic and is increasing, although there's hopes that the increases will be ending soon. This slide shows the drugs that are involved in U.S. overdoses, and it breaks it down to the synthetic opiates other than methadone, which is 20,000, heroin 15,000, and the natural and synthetic opiates, which is 14,000, as well as the cocaine, methamphetamine, and methadone, which is another opiate. The opiate epidemic has a lot of statistics that go along with it. These are 2015 statistics. 12.5 million people misuse the prescription opiates. 2.1 million people misused prescription opiates for the first time. 33,000 people died from overdosing on opiates. 2 million people had prescription opiate use disorder. 15,000 deaths were attributed to overdosing on commonly prescribed opiates. 828,000 people used heroin. 9,500 deaths were attributed to overdosing on synthetic opiates. 135,000 people used heroin for the first time. 12,000 deaths were attributed to overdosing on heroin. The cost was $78.5 billion, and that was from 2013 data. They're projecting the cost to run $500 billion between 2016 to 2020, and $1 trillion between 2001 and 2016. All drug overdose deaths from 2015 data. I think we covered the first bracket. Among males, the rate for overdoses was 20.8, and females it was 11.8. The rate was 30 in people aged 45 to 54 and 28.3 in persons 35 to 44. By race and ethnicity, the death rate was 21 in non-Hispanic whites, 12.2 in non-Hispanic blacks, and 7.7 in Hispanics. By region, for age-adjusted death rates, it was 19.8 in the Northeast, 17.8 in the Midwest, and 15.5 in the South, 13.9 in the West. This slide shows the opiate overdose deaths, and it's broken down by the overall drug overdoses, which was 33,000, the unintentional drug overdoses, which was 29,382. These are 2015 year, and the prescription drug overdoses, which was 15,281, compared to heroin, which was 12,989. And I'm not going to go over this one. This graphic depicts the types of drug overdoses, showing the drug overdose deaths of all intents, the unintentional drug overdose deaths, the drug overdose deaths involving opiates of all intents, and the unintended drug overdose involving any opiates. So the CDC, which we get a lot of our statistics from, has some overdose surveillance, prevention, and research efforts. They had discussed about the opiate overdoses. There's some thinking that when we started to assess for pain being the fifth vital sign, that we kind of went overboard. So the opiate epidemic, they feel, came in 3 waves. The first was in '99, where it started involving prescription opiates more. The second wave was the increase in heroin-involved deaths. And the third wave, which I believe we're still in, is related to fentanyl. So that was a new one on the market. The complications of opiate use, I'm just including these because I'm sure you're all pretty aware of this. There's neurological complications, dermatological, pulmonary, hepatic, and infections. And they're not always related to the drug. It's more the lifestyle of the person with addictions. Next, I'm going to discuss some drug tests, and this is the drugs taking a test. The sensitivity and specificity, I wanted to touch on. The proportion of diseased people who are correctly identified as positive is the sensitivity. As the levels drop over the days, the sensitivity of the test results will also drop. And an easy way to remember is this test rules out. So SN stands for the sensitivity, and it's out. Specificity is the proportion of non-diseased people who are correctly identified as negative by the test. That rules in people, and the way to remember that is SPIN. The SP stands for the specificity. So the topic that I'm doing the most on is the urine drug screening. When you send a specimen, it would start with an immunoassay, and that would be the initial test. It's a rapid test, widely available. It has a high sensitivity but a low specificity. So if it is positive, then the lab usually automatically goes ahead and does the GCMS, which I'm not even going to try to pronounce. And that's a confirmatory test. It's time-consuming and expensive, but a needed test to know what drugs the client's using. It has a high sensitivity and specificity. Positive predictive value is the proportion of those testing positive in a screening test for a disease who truly have the disease. And the negative predictive value is the proportion that in the screening test for a disease who truly do not have the disease. One of the factors to be aware of is how long the drug is going to stay in the system and what type of test it is. So looking at opiates, we have, it's broken down, there's methadone and there's opiates. The methadone stays in the system 2 to 4 days for a urine test, and opiates 2 to 3 days. We're going to go into more about the different kind of testing also for the different types of opiates. The implications, there are many reasons for the possibility of a false positive. In this example, if we're looking at opiates, poppy seeds, I believe 2 bagels with poppy seeds can produce a false positive, which most clients are aware of. False positive have very serious implications in family and criminal court matters, including the client may lose their children behind this, or they may be imprisoned. False negatives will leave a client at risk for overdose. And you also have to, before you interpret the results, be aware of if the client was in detox, what medications were used legally to detox the client, and what are the metabolites that you're going to look for in drug results. Some of the problems with testing you have to know how long the drugs are kept in the urine, and it can also be different for how long a person's been using. So if they've been using heavy, then if the results are going to stay positive longer, such as marijuana can stay up to 1 to 10 weeks. You can also do you can ask the lab to do they break it down to see that the drug level is decreasing over time, and so you'll have to test more than once and then get the levels, make sure that they're coming down. They can also go back up depending on other variables. And another problem with testing is there hasn't always been tests for the different drugs, or they're too expensive to be used. They might have been used in criminal cases but not available in the field, and one of those is fentanyl, and that's one of the big problems now. In ordering tests, it's important to know how many panels you want to order, if you want to do a complete drug screen, if it's going to include things like methadone, Oxycontin, Suboxone, which those usually need a separate test. It's not going to be included under just opiates. You have to know if fentanyl is a part of the testing, and if you just order benzos, then it may not include Xanax, which is one of the more heavily used benzo, but for some reason it has to be ordered separate. So CLIA waived, I already touched on a little bit. Those are the drug tests that you can buy that you can use at the facility if you're not in the hospital. So it's outside of the laboratory. And if you're going to use the results for legal issues, then you would still need to send the specimen to the lab to confirm the testing. And that's what we have to do. This slide goes over agents that cause false positive results. And for opiates and for methadone, you can see that dextromethorphan, Benadryl, and the quinolones. So medications that the clients may be using for legitimate purposes. And this one is for methadone, is also Seroquel, which is kind of commonly used in clients with addiction issues. This table reviews things, the drugs and food that can cause false positives. And for the opiates, the methadone and the heroin, opiates anyway, again, so some of the antipsychotics, antihistamines, the cough suppressants, foods, the poppy seeds, tuberculosis drugs, and antibiotics can cause false positives. It's good to let a client know before you prescribe these medications, so they can choose to use alternative ones in case they're being monitored by probation, parole. So a recommendation for drug testing. The collection procedures are very important. Clients have ways to alter, such as if you check the temperature, you can see if it's something if it's not body temperature. They can water it down using water from the toilet. They use products to help get negative results. Their drug testing is needed to improve client outcomes. You have to use clinical judgment in addition to the testing. So if the client is not appearing to be under the influence, that's a key. You have to know what drugs are found for the test, the sensitivity and specificity of the results. Do randoms and routines. When in doubt, repeat. And keep current knowledge base due to new drug use, such as the fentanyl, and refer to addiction treatment when positive. The references that I would recommend, the ASAM is the American Society of Addiction Medicine. Although they don't have a addiction certification for NPs yet, They have some excellent information, and they also have some free trainings that they give, and the CDC for many of the different topics, and drugabuse.gov. So I wanted to end with something that's could be helpful when you're referring. This one is just there because I like dogs. And the 12 steps, you can remind people when they are being referred to programs, if they have positives, they can usually relate to some of the 12 steps. They usually have some background, and it's a good way, it's a little shortcut for them. And in ending, I would say that the more you know, the more you don't know. That applied to me with this whole course and with doing this presentation, but I found it very helpful. Thanks for listening.